What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Chassis. Braking system. Commercial vehicles usually have strong brakes, and the H1 is no exception. Of course, for a car weighing over 2 tons, rotors with a diameter of 274 mm are not such a great achievement, but in theory, such a car should not be used for flying, and a professional should be at the wheel. In practice, the resource is quite acceptable, because of the large area of pads and 2-piston caliper. And the caliper serves better than on Korean crossovers, and often the first repairs begin after 10 years of operation, and it is usually because of unsuccessful service. The resource of pads is very good. In fact, their thickness in comparison with passenger cars is increased at least on a couple of millimeters. Disc brakes at the rear are also reliable. If on a rear axle there are drums, it is not a trouble. They also go long and quite reliably, and drive of a parking brake in any case is made in easy way, by cables. But there are a couple of nuances. ABS is optional here, and often it does not work when it is available. The second variant is worse than the first one, at least because the stability of the car at braking in this variant is very low. And a new caliper costs from €120, and second-hand in normal condition is not found in nature. The second peculiarity consists in unusual fastening of front brake discs. They stand inside the hub, so that for replacement you need to remove the hub, and then carefully separate the disc from it, which often involves careful work with a sledgehammer or press. You can change rusty ABS rings and bearing oil seals at the same time. In general, there's a lot of work, and chances are you'll break something along the way. Brake tubes, of course, rot after 10 years of use. First of all, as a rule, the rear ones. Part original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 3816 Roadhouse 2286 Blueprint 1. 368 rear brake pads 5702 Mando 2153 Fenix 1787 brake disc front 273 by 26 mm 2758 Bosch 3119 Blueprint 2311 brake drum rear 6. 309 Valeo 2 578 male 6637 suspension. The front suspension in all versions is double wishbone with torsion bar. Rear suspension depends on modification and year of manufacture. Until the middle of 2001, all versions have a split axle on springs, and after that, and only in passenger minibuses with short base, the axle is on springs and with a guide apparatus of 5 levers. The front suspension is made with a considerable safety margin, and maintainability of the design is very high. Among spare parts there are even support cups for the body. Well, and compatibility with light-duty truck porter allows not to worry about the availability of spare parts in stores. On the early cars, the ball bearings need regular syringing, so check this when inspecting and buying. However, even with maintenance-free ball joints, there's usually something to get your hands on. Little by little the characteristics of torsions go away. They are very sensitive to overloading, points of their fasteners do not. Like corrosion, the splines can be torn off at the most inopportune moment, and the adjustment mechanism gets sour, and on the frame. In this place there is often a hotbed of corrosion. So check for an authorized welding when buying. The front arms are strong, but after 10 years the metal gives up at the ball joint mounting points. The holes are broken and corroded, as are the silent block mounting points. The lower arm sometimes loses geometry because of age, overloads, and bad roads. And the points of attachment to the body at mileage 500 plus often have to be welded and replaced. Rear suspension in any case is strong and rather cargo suspension by design. It is considered that since the leaf spring version is structurally simpler, it is cheaper in maintenance. But in practice it is not quite so. There are wearing elements besides the springs themselves, such as silent blocks in the ears of the springs and in the mountings of shock absorbers. The springs themselves are not eternal. They require maintenance, reassembly, and replacement, especially in case of regular overloading or frequent trips on unpaved roads. The rear axle beam has a limited resource. Corrosion undermines the ears, the places of fasteners wear out, and welding should be carried out very carefully, because the beam at local heating can skew, and then the bridge will have to be sent to a specialized service. And the most unpleasant thing is that the leaf spring suspension is heavy not only by design, but also by characteristics. With it on uneven asphalt, an empty car can shake out its soul. It even comes to modification of the suspension under air cylinders for the sake of improving smoothness. The version with 5 levers and springs looks more complicated, but in fact it is easier to maintain. The guiding apparatus itself in the form of rods and levers is stronger. Even with heavy wear of silent blocks there are no misalignments. And problems with stability on the road and the operation of driveshafts. It does not need complicated adjustments. Only a very strong shock can damage the levers. In addition, the car is softer and better controlled. The resource of silent blocks is large, and they are changed very simply and quickly. As a result, there are fewer chances for expensive and protracted repairs. Part original price of non-original 2 suspension front lower lever 6803 Cortex 2060 CTR2 357 front. Upper lever 9080 NTY2 551 CTR 5956 front arm rear silent block 629 Phoebus 350 support point 658 lower ball bearing 2211 CTR1. 128 AS metal 261 front hub, bearing 938 FAG 679 senior 674 steering on the H1 is with a conventional power steering. Pipelines are weak, and the pump is not very reliable, but the whole mechanism usually passes its 300 plus without serious breakdowns. If you do not forget to change the oil. Rail wear, knocks and leaks are connected either with torn dust covers, high loads and dirty oil, or with mileage over 500. Needless to say, non-original hose clamps and sloppy repairs can lead to leaks and pump hum at lower mileage. Transmission. Common problems like many other Hyundais of those years. The Starex H1's half-axle splines rust. The problem is especially acute for four-wheel drive cars, where the splines on the front half-axles are still near the working surface of the roller bearing. In the case of corrosion, we'll have to either change the axle or sharpen the bushing on it, otherwise the resource of bearings will be very small. The splines of the cardan shaft also suffer. But the rear axle is lucky. There the axle is assembled with the hub. The reasons as usual. In poor lubrication and weak oil seals of axles. Well, the quality of steel is not the best either. The joints and gimbal are reliable enough, repaired easily. Everything is disassembled and assembled, if not sour. Mechanical boxes. The majority of the cars are equipped with an automatic transmission. There are 2 types of them here. 4 old diesel engines 4D56, D4BH and gasoline 2.4 G4 GSD 4CB 5-speed M5ZR1 is used. For the newer D4CB diesels, the more recent M5SR1 gearbox is used, and all 4-wheel drive cars are equipped with the M5UR1. Despite the apparent diversity and with all the differences in the bell and housing, and even the shift mechanism, all MCPs are based on the old Mitsubishi V5 MT1 box, with which even retain partial compatibility on clutches and synchronizers. Boxes of these series do not like quick shifts. Synchronizers suffer from this, as well as rocking. Thus, it is possible to get a wedge of the box when quickly shifting from rear to first because of the shift mechanism. The second typical problem of these MCPs is weak oil seals, so after 200,000 leaks are very likely, and the further, the more abundant. But if you do not save money on maintenance, eliminate leaks and shift gears without excessive zeal, the design is conditionally eternal. The only thing that will annoy will be the loose mechanism of shifting, both due to backlashes, and because of the fact that gradually, the fastening of the rocker arm to the body is torn off. And the last moment, cars with M5SR1 box usually have a dual-mass flywheel, an element of wear and tear and not cheap. Automatic boxes automatics on the H1, all other things being equal, are more reliable than mechanics. They can easily go 400,000 or more before overhaul. This is not such a surprise, because their 44D A44DF automatic transmission is good old Aisin AW03-72LE, which has been driving chasers, Altezas, Crowns and Marks with Hilux for more than 20 years. And on the Starex H1 of Korean assembly with a diesel until 2002 put no less legendary A340, aka Aisin 30-43LE. At one time Hyundai got access to these boxes within the cross-licensing agreement between Mitsubishi and Toyota. In general, the breakdowns of boxes of these series are reduced to either a killed torque converter, or friction wear. Breakage of the GDT usually leads to overheating of the box and leakage of the box oil seal, and at the same time to a clogged hydroblock. And almost always the result is a killed pump and the need to wash everything from the remains of the glue layer of the friction lock. Well, and at mileage 350 plus, it is already possible to finish packages overdrive direct forward and low reverse, but it is more often in off-roaders and those who like to start with smoke. Repair usually consists in finding a contract unit. They are available for Korean cars, but not as common as for Japanese variants of automatic transmissions, or still in reassembly, but using a Toyota box as a donor. And even on a set of frictions, from 70 to 80 euros, usually save, because the whole box with minimal mileage with a little luck comes out the same or cheaper. And if among the breakdowns, expensive oil pump or its bushing, then there are simply no options. They cost from 150 euros and still. For this amount will be second-hand, but it is unknown from what unit. Four-wheel drive all-wheel drive on the H1 is the simplest, rigidly connected, so-called part-time. A simple transfer case and vacuum control hubs in the front axle. The transfer case serves for a long time, cardan shafts, too, and their breakdowns are connected mainly with failures of vacuum system. Operation of all-wheel drive on hard surfaces or just with mileage 300 plus. I have already mentioned about front axle splines and bearings above, in the suspension section. Vacuum valve is a consumable. It is located in an unfortunate way and often has to be replaced due to corrosion. Very widespread coal hosing with application of idle valve from VAZ 2105 with number 21050-1127-01002. What is interesting, the Jiguliov analog turns out to be hardly more reliable than the original. Motors. Common problems almost all motors, except for diesel D4CB with capacity of 143-145 HP, have almost direct analogues among Mitsubishi units, but they are not fully compatible with them, and constant creeping changes add confusion. The quality of materials is not very high, so the motors require constant inspection and replacement of small cheap consumables, and most of the fasteners here are disposable. However, the prices are not very high. Particular attention should be paid to the cooling system. Leaks due to leaky pipes of heaters and autonomous cars are common. Gasoline motors. The only gasoline motor on the Hyundai H1 is the G4CS of the Sirius family. In fact, it is a Japanese 4G64 in a version with a single camshaft for 112-118 HP with a small modernization from the Koreans. The problems are exactly the same as on other Mitsubishi models, such as the Outlander first-generation Outlander. First of all, it is the timing mechanism with a belt driving one of the balancer shafts. The belt is weak and thin, and it often breaks on older motors due to wear of the balancer bushings or oil ingress. Its remnants, in turn, make the timing belt. It is thicker and usually passes at 60,000 kilometers quietly. A typical modification is disconnection of balancer shafts at all. For this purpose, the oil pump is improved and the drive belt is removed. Otherwise, this is an excellent motor, strong, with good maintainability and even the potential for tuning. So, you can find examples of installation of the cylinder head with two camshafts and even supercharging. Diesel engines can be divided into two families. The first is the clones of the Japanese Motor 4D56, 8-valve turbo diesel engine with mechanical fuel injection and belt-driven timing. Derivatives of this engine have Hyundai indexes D4BF, D4BH, and D4BA. The most powerful one developed only 103 horsepower, and it is rather good. The second family is more Korean motor D4CB with an output of 143-145 HP with a completely new common rail power system, chain timing, 16-valve cylinder head and long-awaited hydro compensators. All successors to the Japanese 4D56 have at least a few specific ancestor problems. First and foremost is the balancer belt timing design, essentially the same problem as the gasoline 4G64. Only for a heavily vibrating diesel motor, the balancers are more relevant, and given the mileage, problems with balancer liners are more common. The design of timing and without taking into account the problems of balancers is not the most successful. Here over time and rockers fall, and valves need to be adjusted frequently, every 15,000 kilometers. It is advised to change the belt every 50,000 kilometers in a complete set and not to save money, and at the same time to make sure that oil is not poured on it. Oil leaks are the second popular problem. The motor leaks oil from all the cracks, and it can only be dealt with by a complete reassembly with replacement of all the gaskets, with new ones, and often with repair of the piston group. The third trouble is that the massive piston group is quite fragile in practice. It is easy to catch a piston crack due to overheating, overblowing, or a running injector. At the same time, the hefty mass of pistons makes the motor absolutely not cool. It works as a typical truck, 3.5 thousand. Revolutions are almost the limit for it. Usually, any troubles with overheating and overblowing are complicated by a punctured cylinder head gasket. It is worth to watch the presence of gases in the expansion tank carefully. And gaskets should be bought only the best quality ones. And during repairs, be sure to check the planes of the block and cylinder head for warping and damage. At mileage 300 plus and MKP, it is necessary to keep an eye on crankshaft liners. Operation at very low speeds under load kills them by such mileage almost with a guarantee. Let's add a mechanical fuel injector, which is not very cheap. Rapid wear of injector atomizers and smoke because of them. Risks of cracking of the cylinder head and smaller problems like the need for regular replacement of damper pulleys, low life of attachments. Due to very high amplitude of torsional vibrations, not very reliable generator with built-in mechanical vacuum pump. And we get not a good engine. And we get not the most successful engine, but quite suitable for a truck or minibus. However, there are some copies with mileage over 400 and no overhauls. The old-fashioned design has its advantages, but it is very demanding to the quality of service and its intervals, and as a result it is not cheap. In addition, vibrations are quite strong, and fuel consumption on average, 10 liters per 100 kilometers, even in highway mode. Special thanks to Hyundai for the fact that they did not put on their car's newer variants of 4D56 with common rail, lower compression ratio, as well as reinforced crankshaft and piston pin. Because the variants with 116 and 136 horsepower from Mitsubishi showed themselves as not very reliable and resourceful, even the block cracked. And the resource of the piston group was small. That is not surprising, for the revolutions of maximum power were raised almost to gasoline 4,500. New reinforced motors are responsible for most of the negativity about 4D56, and they have nothing to do with H1. The new D4CB motors got rid of belts, the cylinder head became 16-valve, and valves do not need to be adjusted due to hydrocompensators. Progressive common rail power system allowed to increase power up to 140 horsepower with a more confident start in cold weather, and at the same time to reduce fuel consumption on the highway almost 1.5 times. It would seem that all problems are solved? But no, the engine turned out to be quite capricious. Hydrocompensators do not like dirty oil and start knocking, and if you ignore the problem, you can get backed camshafts and tappet shafts. The chains of the timing mechanism, there are 3 of them, are strong enough, go 150 to 250,000 kilometers, or even more, there are copies with mileage over 300. But they do not like high revolutions and rare oil change. They can make noise much earlier in urban operation. In winter, cars with high mileage and chain noise often tear the oil pump drive chain if the engine is cranked in cold. There are also chances that the oil pump itself will jam and the chain will be secondary damage. A clogged oil intake is very damaging to the oil pump. It has a fine mesh, and it is better to check it or change it every time the chain is replaced. The oil pump itself should be preventively changed at 300 plus mileage, especially if the liners or hydrocompensators have been worn. It has no performance reserve at all. Very early, at the mileage of about the same 200,000, you can face the wear of crankshaft liners. And at mileage of more than 300,000 you start to have problems with balance shaft liners. Turbines Garrett 1752S on this version were not very reliable and much more expensive than Mitsubishi TD04-9 or Borg-Warner BV43-2074. On 4D56, any drop in oil pressure leads to their failure. But in general the resource is acceptable. They can go through 200,000. True, the price of a cartridge on Garrett from Chinese manufacturers is not large, from 90 to 120 euros. Nozzles are more expensive than simple mechanical ones on 4D56, but they serve their 300,000 properly, and atomizers do not need to be changed, although nozzle rings burn out quickly with frequent use of full power. Vacuum pump is reliable, provides normal operation of brakes and connection of the front axle. The throttle on the inlet is necessary for EGR operation, but is useful for engine braking and for preventing runaway operation, especially since it is not clogged with soot. The average life of the piston group is under 500,000. It rarely serves less. At the same time, the motor does not like high revolutions as well as old engines. EGR is more capricious, the heat exchanger or its tube can leak. The EGR valve itself correctly supplies soot into the intake, greatly reducing the power of the motor over time. The intake manifold gasket is regularly squeezed out in the area of the first cylinder. In general, a newer Korean motor is more complicated and much less repairable than an older Japanese motor. And spare parts are noticeably more expensive, which is especially true when the mileage is 500 plus. However, it is more economical and provides very good dynamics of the car. Part original price of non-original 2-engine radiator 2, 512018 Nissan 7 412 Cortex 4868 balancer shaft. Drive belt 2, 51789 Dayco 672 Mando 569 timing belt 2, 52880 Dayco 1 290 Mando 1 402 timing belt kit 2, 5 out of stock Dongil 4. 181 nozzle 2, 54914 out of stock turbine 2, 54D 5643 709 Stelox 17789 Kraft 8481, cartridge, pump assembly 2, 54944 Fenix 1941. Hapu 7177 to take or not to take. The specifics of operation and age of Hyundai Starex H1 of the first generation are such that it is necessary to choose not a modification, but a specific copy, which has not yet managed to wear out to the state of scrap metal. And yet, all other things being equal, cars with more modern diesel engines and spring rear suspension look the most human-friendly. In conclusion, when considering the Hyundai Starex or H1A1, it's clear that the automatic transmission offers greater reliability compared to its manual counterpart, making it a more practical choice for many drivers. Additionally, the advantages of Korean diesel engines, particularly in terms of performance and efficiency, position them as a superior option over Japanese alternatives. Ultimately, these factors contribute to a more enjoyable and dependable driving experience, solidifying the Hyundai Starex or H1. A1 as a standout choice in its class. Thank you for watching, and we hope this information helps you make an informed decision.